Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport, and now we look at part 3 of my rating every Ferrari driver ever entered in Formula 1 list. And now things start to get interesting with some recognisable names entering the fray. Remember to go back and watch parts 1 and 2 and subscribe so you don't miss parts 4 and 5. A lot of good names on this list today as we head closer to the top 30. So remember to leave your thoughts down below with who you think will be in the top 10. And with that, sit back, relax and let's begin.
Welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport.
Number 45, Mike Parks. At 6'4", Mike Parks is not your average Formula 1 driver. Ferrari had to give him a specially designed longer car to race in. But after Mike Parks failed to qualify for the David Fry team at the British Grand Prix in 1959, he would make a name for himself in sports car racing and have success in the 1964 12 Hours of Sebring in a Ferrari 275P with Umberto Maglioli. After a period of continued sports car success for Parks and John Surtees unexpectedly leaving the team, this led to Mike Parks driving for the Grand Prix team. He had great success, scoring a second place on his debut at Monaco and finishing his first year with another second place at Monza. He scored a couple of non-championship wins in 1967, along with a fifth place at the Dutch Grand Prix before a career-ending crash at Spa after spinning on Jackie Stewart's oil. This ended any chance of a full campaign with Ferrari, and Mike Parks was killed in a road collision in Italy in 1977. Number 44, Eugenio Castellotti. A young Italian driver is the perfect fit for Scuderia Ferrari, and Eugenio Castellotti was a true talent to boot. He scored a second place in his second race at Monaco in 1955, along with points in the Netherlands and a podium at Monza, led Castellotti to third in the championship at his first try, with just 12 points. 12 points in 2020 would land you 15th. 1956 didn't go so well with only 2 points finishes, 4th in Monaco and 2nd in France, when he lost out to Peter Collins, by just 0.03 of a second. All looked good for 1957. He qualified 4th in Argentina but retired with a wheel issue before being killed in a practice accident in a prototype Ferrari in Modena. Another waste of young talent. Number 43, Mario Andretti. A former champion. What is he doing this low on the list? Well, Mario Andretti won the title with Lotus in 1978, but he has a much shorter history with Ferrari, making his first start with the team in 1971 on a part-time basis. He'd win the opening round in South Africa, which was Andretti's first of 12 wins in Formula 1. The rest of the year was spent retiring from races or not qualifying for them in the case of Monaco, but he would score a 4th place in Germany. But he had even less races in 1972, would only score a couple of points finishes. After racing for Parnelli, Lotus, Alfa Romeo and Williams in the meantime, Mario Andretti finished his Formula 1 career with Ferrari in 1982, replacing Didier Pironi. He scored a final podium at Monza before suspension ended his final race at Caesar's Palace. Number 42, Ludovico Scafioti. The ultimate part-time driver, Scafioti only had 6 races in 4 years for Ferrari in Formula 1. Regardless, he does have a Ferrari win under his belt, the Italian Grand Prix in 1966. 54 years later, and he is still the last Italian to win the Italian Grand Prix. He would have a couple of other points finishes for Ferrari, including his debut in 1963, but he was never given a full drive. But he did win Le Mans in 1963 in a Ferrari. Strange that they never took the plunge and gave Scafioti a full-time drive. Number 41, Maurice Trinton. The only driver to race for Bugatti in Formula 1. France, 1956, look it up. Maurice Trinton was the original journeyman racer in Formula 1, racing for Equipe Gordini, Ecurie Rosier, Van Wall, Bugatti, Wob Rorke, Scuderia Centrosud, BRM, David Brown, Scuderia Serenissima, Reg Parnell, and also his own self-entered team in his final few races in 1964, in a career that lasted 14 years in Formula 1, including 2 Monaco wins. He first raced for Ferrari in 1954, scoring 2 podiums and finishing 4th in the championship. He'd only get 2 points finishes for Ferrari in 1955, a shared podium in Argentina, followed by his first Monaco win. He led the championship after 2 rounds, but no more points finishes meant another 4th in the championship. He briefly returned in 1957 for 3 races and he got another couple of points finishes, but nothing ever came of it. One of the best early drivers never to be champion. Number 40, Paul Freire. A driver who only got a few races with Ferrari, but he was a great talent not just in Grand Prix racing but more in sports car racing. Another Ferrari F1 driver who was also a Le Mans winner, winning in 1960 with Olivier Gendebien. He only had 3 races in Formula 1 for Ferrari, an 8th in Monaco and a 4th at Spa in 1955 and a 2nd place at Spa in 1956. He was almost only brought in as a Spa specialist as it was Paul Freire's home track. He even has a corner named after him. Number 39, Dan Gurney. The American made his debut with Ferrari in 1959 after impressing on a test basis for the team. He'd scored a 2nd in Germany and a 3rd in Portugal in only his 2nd and 3rd Formula 1 races. After just 4 races in 1959, Dan Gurney managed to finish 7th in the championship. He would go on to win 5 Grand Prix, including being the only driver to win a Formula 1 race for both Porsche and Eagle. He'd never be champion or race for Ferrari after 1959, but Dan Gurney did a grand job for Ferrari in his 4 races. Number 38, Luigi Musso. Luigi Musso has been a podium scorer for fellow Italian brand Maserati, 2nd in Spain in 1954 and a 3rd at the Dutch Grand Prix in 1955. So Ferrari signing him made sense and he won in a shared drive with Juan Manuel Fangio at the 1956 Argentine Grand Prix. He retired from the other 3 races he had that year, but 2 second places in 1957 helped to a decent 3rd in the championship behind Fangio and Moss. He'd scored 2 more second places at the start of 1958, but was killed at the French Grand Prix in a horrifying accident. Notably, he had an ongoing rivalry with Ferrari teammates Peter Collins and Mike Hawthorne, who shared their prize money evenly but left Musso out. They would also both be dead within a year. The early days of Formula 1 are very scary. Number 37, Richie Ginther. Another man who debuted with Ferrari, getting a point in Monaco in 1960, followed by another point in the Netherlands. He had a brief break, not starting the French Grand Prix in a Scarab, whatever the hell that is, before returning to Ferrari with an amazing 2nd place in Italy, in a Ferrari 1-2-3 behind Peter Collins but ahead of Willy Marias. He'd have a full season in 1961 where a few podiums led to a decent 5th in the championship. He had a decent career getting a single win for Honda in 1965, as well as finishing 3rd in the championship with BRM in 1963. Number 36, Piero Taruffi. Former European motorcycle 500cc champion Piero Taruffi, a championship he won all the way back in 1932 on a Norton, started his Formula 1 career at the final round in 1950 for Alfa Romeo, but moved to Ferrari in 1951, scoring a 2nd place in Switzerland, but only another couple of points finishes for a 6th place finish in the final standings. 1952 was his best year, winning in Switzerland to start the season, podiums in France and Britain, and taking a 3rd place in the championship as well as a couple of non-championship races. He'd only have a couple more races for Ferrari in the next couple of years, as well as Mercedes, Maserati and Van Wall. His final win was the 1957 Mile Miglia, which featured the death of Alfonso de Portego, which we mentioned in the previous video, and after those tragic events, Piero Taruffi promised his wife he'd never race again, and he kept that promise. Number 35, Luigi Villarresi. A pre-war racer who made his Ferrari debut when Ferrari debuted at Monaco in 1950, where he sadly retired with a rear axle failure and scored no points for 1950. But he got a run of 3 3rd places in 1951, which led him to a good 5th overall in the championship. In 1952, he only competed in 2 races, finishing 3rd in both. 1953 started with a best 2nd in Belgium and the Dutch Grand Prix, but a disappointing mid-season and a final podium in Italy at season's end led to another 5th overall. He'd later raced for Maserati and Lancia amongst others, and then was retired by the end of the 1950s. He also had 6 non-championship wins, one of the elder statesmen of older Formula 1 racing. Number 34, Jean Alesi. What is a world-renowned driver like Jean Alesi doing down in 34th on the list? Well, his time with Ferrari wasn't spectacular. It came at a bad time for Ferrari. Jean Alesi had spent 2 years with Tyrrell in 1989 and 1990, getting a couple of 2nd places in the process, and he was picked up by Ferrari for 1991 to partner French legend Alain Prost. But Ferrari had not won the Drivers' Championship since 1979, But Prost and Mansell in 1990 had at least been competitive. In 6 years with Ferrari, Jean Alesi would do no better than 5th in the championship and would only get one win, the only win of his career in Canada in 1995. But Jean Alesi would claim 16 podium finishes in that time. It was just a lot more was expected of the Frenchman. He saw out his career with Benetton, Sauber, Jordan and Prost, but no more wins would ever come Jean Alesi's way. A really good driver, just ended up at Ferrari a few years too early. Number 33, Tony Brooks. One of the great unsung talents of early days Formula 1, Tony Brooks was the first driver to win a Grand Prix in a British car in Formula 1, winning for Vanwall in 1957 at Aintree. After finishing third in the championship with Vanwall in 1958, he moved over to Ferrari for a single season, taking a second at Monaco, winning in France and Germany, racing for Vanwall at the British Grand Prix because the Italian workforce were on strike, but he got a final podium at the American Grand Prix at Sebring and only just missed out on the title, finishing 7 points behind Jack Brabham and slightly ahead of Sterling Moss. Tony Brooks saw out his career with a couple of appearances in Old Vanwalls before a final season with BRM, but a career with 6 wins and numerous podiums, a couple of close calls in the overall championship. Also, Tony Brooks is the last Grand Prix winner from the 1950s to still be alive. Number 32, Patrick Tombe. A driver I spoke about at length a long time ago on this channel. Patrick Tombe had a very tough challenge in front of him when he joined Ferrari, midway through the 1982 season. He had to jump in and fill the shoes left by Gilles Villeneuve. It went pretty well. Tombe had a disappointing time at McLaren in 1978 and 1979 and bad spells with Theodore Racing and Ligier in 1981. He wasn't on the grid at the start of 1982 but ended up racing for Ferrari in the latter half of the season. It was a pretty tragic season for Ferrari with Gilles Villeneuve's death and Didier Pironi losing the championship after suffering a career-ending injury. Tombe scored his first win in Formula 1 at the German Grand Prix and ended the season 7th even though he missed most of the season, including 2 races towards the end with a bad back. He'd have a full season in 1983, another win at Imola and several podiums led to a decent 4th overall in the championship, only 19 points behind champion Piquet, but he was replaced by Michael Alboreto and spent his last few years with Renault and the original Haas team, a truly underrated driver. Number 31, Chris Eamon. Another driver I have spoken at length about, and well known as the unluckiest driver in Formula 1 ever. Chris Eamon was a greatly talented driver who never won a Grand Prix. He scored 6 podiums for Ferrari in 2.5 years. His first in 1967 was best with 4 podiums and 5th overall in the championship. His races usually ended in retirement in 1968, but he still managed a 2nd place at the British Grand Prix and after a disappointing half season in 1969, left to race for a whole multitude of teams, including his own. One of my favourite racers and a true legend to end this part of the list on. So that is part 3 of the Rating Every Ferrari Driver Ever series. Remember to subscribe for parts 4 and 5. We are going to cover some top names in the next part of the list, so it's sure to be a banger of a video. Leave your thoughts down below on whether you agree or disagree with the placements here and predictions for the top 10. So remember to subscribe and comment, like and share. Thank you for watching and have a good one.